Welcome to the very first episode of On TRAC, the show where we bring you all the latest and juiciest developments from the OriginTrail ecosystem in the Decentralized Knowledge Graph, aka the DKG. I'm your host, Jonathan, and this episode was recorded live in front of a studio audience on January 18. And by a studio audience, I mean it was live streamed on YouTube and Twitter/X. I was joined by OriginTrail's co-founders, Žiga, Tomaž, and Branimir, and we unpacked the launch of OriginTrail V8 and the 2024 roadmap, and we had a really great conversation about the V8 Foundation and its 3 impact bases, which they explain in great detail, how the OriginTrail DKG will achieve 100x scalability, AI-powered partnerships, the newly launched Knowledge Beta Mining Program on NeuroWeb and how to participate, TRAC token staking and how it will work, and the upcoming GS1 Summit, which OriginTrail will be both sponsoring and attending. On TRAC is an interactive show where we take you, the listeners, questions and ask them to the OriginTrail team. So if you like what you hear of this episode, follow OriginTrail on X at origin_trail to get notified about the next episode and learn how to submit your questions. So, let's get into it. Here's the first episode of On TRAC. Without further ado, let's get to what everyone's been asking about. Let's kick this off. And why don't you introduce the show? What made you want to start this new podcast? And what are some of the exciting things that you have planned for this first episode that you want to discuss?
Awesome. Above all, thank you, Jonathan, for taking this podcast further and allowing us to tell more and more widely about OriginTrail. And OriginTrail has been about a lot of things. Initially, we started by making supply chains more transparent. And it's been over 10 years since we've been developing OriginTrail in one shape or the other. And over the course of the past 6 years, since OriginTrail has become an open source, open project, permissionless network where anyone can simply jump into Telegram and start discussing, can start participating to what we built, can start running Node. The technology itself and the ecosystem, the community has been a place of an excitement. Lately, we've been developing a lot of very interesting and sophisticated things in order to tackle not just transparency and trust issues in supply chains. So pretty much man-made problems when it comes to integrity with the data exchanges, data sharing, but also what machines have been causing lately. And it all seems that artificial intelligence and with the advent of, let's call them retail tools, AI has become one of the biggest bullshit generators. And OriginTrail, on the other hand, has a very important role to play here because it can drive information provenance in a similar fashion as it has been driving provenance about products, provenance about information about products, services, so in supply chains. And we like to say what books were for Amazon, supply chains are for OriginTrail. OriginTrail is now going much further, also tackling issues of misinformation, hallucinations caused by the artificial intelligence. And why this show? It's simply because this man, his name is Professor Bob Metcalfe. He's also the formulator of this law of network effects. He even once stated that OriginTrail is a very promising technology with one huge problem, which is that it is very difficult to understand everything, all the intricacies, because the technology is so novel and sophisticated. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, to shed more light about what we're building, what is the significance, so what are the outcomes and implications of the OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph and other accompanying technologies such as NeuroWeb. Yeah, so in this show today, we're going to be covering actually several topics. The show is titled the V8 Foundation, which is essentially the next development phase following the V6 development phase. And what the previous versions, so previous V5, V6 brought to OriginTrail ecosystem is it was already quite a significant scalability, then enabled us to onboard more partners. We have partners also amongst some of the most respected companies, such as British Standards Institution, And that brought us to a lot of respected companies in the US. For example, there's an association called SCAN, which is a supplier compliance audit network. And already the previous version of OriginTrail was capable enough, essentially, to allow larger retailers such as Walmart, Home Depot, Costco, and dozens of others to exchange audit reports on over 40% of the entire imports to the United States. There are some 25,000 factories which need to go through audits, and OriginTrail is there as a backbone to allow for data exchanges to take place. Now, the groundbreaking V8 network, we aim to bring this scalability much, much further. And in addition to that, there are a few other very important things that are making the technology much, much stronger and fit to tackle some of the most recent issues, like the one that I mentioned, misinformation within the age of AI, also hallucinations by AI. And all of this is going to be done by essentially allowing for even more people to get involved in the OriginTrail ecosystem, which is based on three core principles. One of them, neutrality; second, inclusiveness; and third, usability. So whatever we build, it has to be useful. So we're going to be covering topics such as partnerships that are essentially being empowered by the AI solutions on top of OriginTrail. We're going to be talking about staking TRAC. So how can more people participate, and how can more of the utility token, which is called TRAC, get utilized towards making the world a better place at the end of the day. We're going to be talking about knowledge mining, which is there to essentially kickstart this new era of knowledge economy, again, on the inclusiveness basis. So anyone can participate in what is today called the beta knowledge mining, starting with the artist category and then going into many other categories. Furthermore, we're also sponsoring and taking stage with quite big brands such as Microsoft, Avery Dennison in February. So we're going to be revealing more AI-based solutions, and some of them even based on a DNA technology. So how to bring information from the digital world into the DNA world. And we're also glad because, frankly speaking, we get invited by bigger companies to events, and most likely in the next couple of months or even in the next month, we're going to be able to meet some of you in one of Europe's capitals, as we got also an invitation from our partners at Google to present what is the latest and the greatest that we've been building, also in relation with our partnership with Google. So we're going to be touching upon how new partnerships are forged, and of course many more. And I'm really glad because the technology, and like I said, we're doing this because one of our advisors, Bob Metcalf, he also stated that the technology is complicated, but I think we have gotten a long way. And there is one thing that really makes us all happy, is that there are even some partners which want to bring this technology much, much further when it comes to usability and user friendliness, even to an extent that a partner is considering putting the OriginTrail technology, of course, in a user-friendly form, into a TV commercial. And you're able to essentially witness what OriginTrail has achieved in the stores of supermarkets here in Southeastern Europe, which is pretty spectacular. So without further ado, I would pass the mic to my partners, Branimir and Tomaž, to say hello and a few words from their side before we dig into the questions.
All right. Hello. Okay, I guess my mic is the only one that you can't see, but it is a new one, so I hope it sounds better as well. Žiga made a great intro. A lot of exciting stuff we'll be covering today. So thanks to Jonathan for taking on this important role into kicking off and then being what he called the captain of the ship of this podcast. So I'm looking forward to chatting today and then many more chats in the future. And yeah, welcome and stay on track.
Another new mic here. I hope that my voice goes well this time. I know the community has mentioned a few times how we don't have the great sound. So I guess it's time to change that with the podcast. Welcome, everybody. Super excited we got this going. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll cover a lot of things today, so I won't take too much time, but I'm super happy we got this thing going, and let's hit it off and let's get on track.
Amazing. So before we get started, All-Star Runner wants to know, Žiga, if there's anywhere that he can buy that shirt, that Bob Metcalf shirt.
If you're anywhere around Europe in the coming months, we'll be hanging out in Brussels, in Amsterdam, most likely Berlin. You can definitely get it if you're able to meet us. I still have plenty in my garage. And also Branimir, I believe he has some other cool shirts.
How am I the only guy that doesn't have those shirts? I'm missing out, man.
Well, apparently Žiga's got a ton in his garage, so gotta swing by.
Absolutely.
There's so much to get into in this episode that it's hard to even know where to begin. So you guys have dropped just a crazy amount of alpha and announcements in the past couple of weeks. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of everything that you mentioned, why don't we zoom out a little bit, start more broad, and get into what exactly V8 is and what it entails. You know, it's the title of this episode, the V8 Foundation. It's the title of the most recent blog that you dropped on the OrginTrail Medium. What is the V8 Foundation? How does it expand on what you built with V6? And maybe I'm crazy, but what happened to V7? It went from 6 to 8. So where's number 7?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll get it started. Essentially V8 is the next iteration, though, as V6 was one of the biggest updates so far. And for those of you who have been following OriginTrail for a while, you know how big of an update it was. It wasn't really an incremental from 5 to 6. It was rather much more than that. It was really an exponential update because it brought so much new stuff into the DKG on basically on all layers. Well, V8 is going to be very much similar type of update, which is going to introduce quite a lot of new exciting stuff that the DKG can do. One of the things we already mentioned was that we are looking to scale the capacity of the DKG at least 100x, which is also the track record of V6 and perhaps some more. So for those of you who've been around since V5, you've probably seen it. But not just the scalability. Outside of that, we got a ton of new things that are coming and to which knowledge mining is going to lead. So we're surely going to be talking about knowledge mining a lot today, but that's one of the big news that is coming in and through the beta program being developed, but ultimately leading to this notion of an autonomous decentralized knowledge graph. Essentially a system that is able to grow on its own, to create knowledge at even faster pace than it is right now, that is actually collecting right now. Rather, it will be able to generate, and it will have all kinds of AI capability on pretty much every possible layer. All of this enabled by the foundation of V6, and then the impact bases that we've listed are going to take us there towards the version V8. And the V7 versioning system is an interesting question here. For those of you who might be a little bit more aware of, let's say, the evolution of Linux or generally versioning labels in terms of computer science, it's not an unusual thing to see that the even number version is the actual productive version, while the actual versions that are odd numbers, like 3 was for OriginTrail, by the way, and in this case, 7 are more developmental, kind of internal versions. So essentially what we're doing is we're building and we are establishing a long-term version. For those of you, for example, who are using Ubuntu, you might have noticed that the version is always the good version, the one that you should be using. The stable LTS version is always an even number. So OriginTrail V8 is essentially a successor to V6 and being developed on the basis of V6. So it inherits all of the great properties of V6 and then adds quite a bit. So I guess we'll dive deeper into the specific basis over the course of the call. I won't dive deeper right now, but do you guys want to add something? Do you think it's important to address it at the beginning?
We could have also called it V8000, I guess, if we'd be going by impact, because, that's like there's huge leaps happening here. And as we'll touch on this impact basis and what they bring to the table, I mean, it's just, we're in a Metcalfe space. So everything's really kind of going after those network effects. And as you start compiling them, they add up to some beautiful things happening.
Yeah, I would just add the user friendliness already in this journey, the foundation journey towards the V8 is becoming strikingly apparent. Anyone is able to use DKG now in one way or another. If nothing else, you can go and ask anything about OriginTrail by simply prompting chat DKG on X platform and then receive an answer back. So play with it and let us know what you would like to see going in an even better direction. So really making things far less sophisticated and useful for just about anyone.
Very exciting. So let's dive into it then. The V8 roadmap is broken into 3 sections, each with its own timeline. and its own unique name, which, as I understand it, is inspired by Isaac Asimov's The Foundation, which is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of iRobot, both the book and the movie. We have the Trantor phase, which is scheduled for Q1 of 2024. The Terminus phase, which is scheduled for Q2 of 2024. And Gaia, which is H2 2024. So this puts us in the Trantor phase right now, which itself comprises 2 new developments, which anybody who's spent any amount of time in the OriginTrail community chat rooms knows people are very excited about and are very anticipated. So knowledge mining and staking. So let's start with knowledge mining. What exactly is knowledge mining? How will it work? And I guess what's the end goal of this process? Like, this knowledge is mined, it's on the DKG as knowledge assets. What's the point, and what's it going to be used for? Is it going to interact with each other? Break down for us what this knowledge mining is all about.
Yeah, maybe I can give it a first stab. So maybe just before we go into knowledge mining, one of the first things you mentioned is the 3 impact bases, the Trantor, Terminus, and Gaia, are actually not exactly phases of sorts. Rather, they are intertwining. So Trantor keeps developing. So it doesn't end at a certain stage and the new phase begins. Rather, they all push together and they get switched on. So as permanent planets, they stay part of this OriginTrail universe, and they continue contributing to they basically form the foundation. And if you've read iRobot, I totally recommend reading The Foundation. It's like an incredible series of books, very inspiring. And when you read it, you will look at the DKG in a new, I'm sure, better light, because it really is the story of the DKG. So that's why this whole reference comes into play as well, because Asimov was such a forward-seeking person that he really got the immense value of knowledge, what role it will play in the future of humanity, essentially 20,000 years in the future. So very much recommended to anybody who's at least remotely interested in sci-fi, probably the best sci-fi work ever. Now, when it comes to Trantor in this book is one of the key planets, which has a huge library. This library being essentially the biggest library in the galaxy, which also gives Trantor its power. And to generate a similar type of library, we're looking at knowledge mining as one of the key new capabilities that are coming to play. So the aim of knowledge mining is that, just as for Bitcoin, when you contribute to the Bitcoin network, essentially giving it hash power, or rather providing security, you're mining Bitcoin and you're getting essentially Bitcoin tokens as a reward because you're contributing this valuable resource to the global network. In much in the same way, knowledge mining is contributing, rather than security and hash rate, contributing knowledge to the DKG and then getting essentially rewarded in tokens in return, rewarded by the neuroweb. So the neuroweb being capable of administering mining and rewarding you with neuro tokens. So what this means essentially is, obviously, valuable knowledge. When it gets together, we get the benefits of the Metcalfe's law, and essentially the more knowledge gets connected, not just pushed into the DKG, but also connected to each other, the more possibilities. And as Žiga said, like today, you can go on X and you can ask a question about OriginTrail, but other things as well, and it will respond to you. It responds by this knowledge from the DKG. So essentially, the more knowledge and the more connected this knowledge, the better it can answer to questions. But it doesn't just answer these questions, inventing them, those answers like an LLM. Rather, it does extractive knowledge answering. So it literally goes into the knowledge base, finds the best answer, and returns it to you. So it's more of a AI-assisted search, extraction, rather than hallucination, which is kind of they even say it's a feature of LLMs, that they don't hallucinate, and that's a bug. It's really a feature. They constantly hallucinate, but they hallucinate generally well. So generally, they get things well. They will give you an okay answer most of the time. But if they don't know something, they'll guess, and they can be very, very convincing bullshit generators. So in that case, the counterweight to that is having a very good, solid, collaboratively created, crowdsourced knowledge base that has properties of verifiability, discoverability, and ownership, of course, on the DKG. And then through knowledge mining, essentially, we, using Neuro, incentivize the creation of this major knowledge base Trantor library, the big library that will be then used to build on top as one of the impact bases. Now, in the knowledge mining beta program, what we're actually doing is we're kickstarting this effort. So it's going to be an ongoing effort, collaborative effort with the community. That means the builders, knowledge miners, node runners, token holders, all of us will have the opportunity to essentially participate in this activity in several specific categories through which we will iterate on the system. And essentially, this will give us the right input and the right learnings, how to precisely implement knowledge mining in production in V8. So essentially, the journey towards V8 is at one branch through the trend or impact base on the knowledge beta mining. In this iterative process, we will learn essentially together as a community how to do it. I'm sure people listening to me right now probably don't know how to do it. So this is going to be the opportunity. And once you learn, we'll also learn as developers how to make it more usable, how to make, how to include other tools in the best possible way, iterating in this lean fashion and getting to the best possible result that is the V8. And we expect to actually get quite a lot of interesting knowledge and to demonstrate the value of this intersection of LLMs and knowledge graphs, which is really this neural and symbolic branches of AI. At this intersection is where the most value will be created. So this value, when I mention value, I mean there's a ton of value already created with knowledge graphs in Web 2. So if you've never seen that, if you're just bumping into this podcast right now, you probably don't know, but like I guess generally the OriginTrail community, the hardcore fans already know that pretty much all of these big Web 2 companies like Netflix, Amazon, Google, you name it, Uber, they all have knowledge graphs under the hood, and connecting a lot of this data into knowledge, converting it into knowledge graphs, they benefit a ton because it literally creates so much value. And that's why they even keep it centralized. They don't necessarily open their knowledge graphs to the outside. But that's used for all kinds of search engines, recommendation engines, many, many different types of problems. And this type of value actually is where OriginTrail enables anybody to take this technology, same type of technology, same standards, and apply it together with a neural AI so that we can build collaboratively a crowdsourced knowledge base, and then we build collaboratively open source software that brings this value out to everybody in Web3. So this is kind of the direction of where knowledge mining goes, ultimately leading to this autonomous knowledge mining, where we'll have AI creating new knowledge. And that AI, that's kind of a bigger topic, but there's a lot of ways this can happen. And this additional capability is going to be one of the most revolutionary things, because you will essentially have the knowledge base, the library, grow on its own, inferring new facts, reasoning, understanding, and all of that also obviously with properties of clear origin, so not data provenance, ownership, discoverability, and verifiability. So it's going to be very, very exciting. Specifically when we open up all of the knowledge mining beta program to life. Right now, the art category is open. So anybody who wants to do knowledge mining, go ahead and visit NeuroWeb and join the waitlist. So you can be basically part of the program. And we're all looking to see artists create specifically their art, enshrine their art in the DKG through the form of knowledge assets, as well as essentially derive new art from it in the right way. So yeah, that's the CTA. Jump in, neuroweb.ai, and apply for knowledge mining beta program.
If you're minting something on the DKG, that's what knowledge mining is. You have to pay TRAC to mine the knowledge. Is that right?
Yeah. So much like you would use electricity with Bitcoin, although this is an oversimplification, but you need to expense something. And in the case of knowledge mining, you'd be expensing TRAC, because the TRAC is then being used to reward nodes in the decentralized knowledge graph to essentially host information, the knowledge graph, the knowledge assets that you'd relay onto the network. And of course, in turn, you would receive rewards in a Neuro token. This is a new component that is supposed to essentially amp up the creation of knowledge assets. And in turn, that also drives the further adoption of the utility token, well beyond the enterprise segment, which is already living on the DKG. There's been a lot of things created that even governmental projects or European institutions supporting the development of stuff on the DKG. And actually, kind of the predecessor or the early, let's say, instigator of the knowledge mining program is the Next Generation Internet Initiative financed by the European Commission. And OriginTrail managed to get support by the sub-initiative, which is called NGI Search. And within this NGI Search, we have also developed the so-called beta mining program. So essentially bringing supporters as huge as European Union to support the network and essentially initiate certain new development things that are going to bring a further need and a much bigger need for the utility tokens that are already being used by the decentralized knowledge graph. And that's quite a rare case, because if you look into the Web3 space, there's not much of a real world use. When it comes to OriginTrail, it doesn't get more real than what OriginTrail is being used for, not just in supply chains, but also in some other sectors such as construction, financial industry, improving transparency when it comes to publishing stuff. So media, real world assets are being created on the decentralized knowledge graph. So we have world's renowned sommeliers, some of them launched even companies in that space. And there's even a company from Hong Kong that is now looking into the DKG and showcasing how to essentially launch wine collections as real world assets. So overarchingly, OriginTrail has always been about the real world adoption. And this real world adoption then essentially translates into what kind of knowledge can be mined on the decentralized knowledge graph. And within the knowledge mining program, starting within the art category, we're now continuing into other sectors such as decentralized science, Web3 ecosystem. So plenty of opportunities to anybody to get involved.
One more point that's kind of sets knowledge mining apart from Bitcoin mining is that if you mine Bitcoin and you get a chance to mine that block, the reward gets there, and that kind of like is end of the story. With knowledge mining, the point is that those that are early in knowledge mining is that they can have a ripple effect in the future as well. So if you create a high quality knowledge asset that can provide value, so others are connecting to it, adding to it, it's an important pillar of this genesis knowledge that gets created, then that is going to be beneficial for you in the knowledge mining perspective from there on. It's a good time to kind of get involved early on because of that.
So I'm going to ask some of the questions people had from our audience in the community about knowledge mining. And I guess in the interest of time, maybe we should make these sort of more quick hit answers. And then we can move on to staking, which I'm assuming people are also very excited to hear about. So one question we got was, once users have minted their knowledge assets, is there going to be a way for them to monetize those assets in some way?
That is in plans. And also the multi-chain approach supports this vision of having multitude of chains on which you can mine knowledge assets. And these chains then also support different marketplaces. So the short answer is yes.
Wonderful. Another question was, why is it considered beta knowledge mining? Does this imply that there's going to be some final ultimate stage of knowledge mining?
Yeah, for sure. OriginTrail is a pioneer in many things, and including knowledge mining. Typically, you would want to test things in a beta before opening up floodgates for other sectors, for other types of knowledge mining to take place. So there are several others versions which will come out.
All right, and then we have one question from YouTube from Andrew, who asks, knowledge mining seems best targeted to corporations. How will corporations not already involved with the DKG be made aware of which knowledge is being requested by entities already on the DKG? So I guess maybe another way to ask this would be, how do you know if the knowledge that you're mining is already on the DKG? And then what happens if there's duplicate knowledge that ends up being mined at the same time?
So perhaps a quick question. If you go and try to use ChatDKG, oftentimes you would receive a reply that the ChatDKG is not able to answer your question. So that's the distinction between generative AI. If you're using entirely just generative AI instead of the RAG system, you would always get an answer. In the case of the ChatDKG, the network essentially would give you a response that actually exists in the network. So that's one of the mechanisms how you become aware of, let's say, the chasm in the network or the void that needs to be filled in with new knowledge or connected new knowledge for the answers that you're looking for. So that's pretty easy to find out. And we even work with some of our partners that engage their consumers, their customers. And it is also our role when we're building solutions for them to also then help them monitor should there be a question that the ChatDKG-like system cannot answer. this is where we also jump in and we help those corporations, enterprises to essentially mine knowledge. Although right now that is not yet called mining, to mine in knowledge, but in the future, corporations are going to be able to very quickly identify the void in the knowledge, and knowledge mining will definitely help fill in that void in the decentralized knowledge graph.
And then I'll ask one more here that we got on X on this topic. If you guys could just give like a brief overview of what, like when you're minting a knowledge asset, what sort of information is contained in that knowledge asset? Like what does it look like effectively?
The knowledge asset, you can consider it as kind of like a container of knowledge. So you can put inside whatever you want. It's up to you as the creator. Ideally, you use a certain structure to it and whatnot. So it's not just like a blob of content. But also this knowledge, the container of knowledge, essentially also contains an NFT on the chain that you create this knowledge asset on. So think of it, NFT on chain, piece of knowledge in the graph that connects to other knowledge, essentially cryptographically linked through this thing called the uniform asset locator. So effectively, you get a one structure that lives in essentially two places. And what that means is that you can mint different knowledge assets on different chains, and you can use them on across those chains. So you can use the DKG as kind of like an oracle in between of them. You can share the information across different chains. So that's basically it. That's what the knowledge asset looks like. It's an NFT plus a piece of knowledge. Ownership of that NFT represents the ownership of that knowledge. That also means that if you own the NFT, you can expose it to marketplaces because you're the owner, as well as that you can also update this knowledge. So, for example, a reason why you would update the knowledge asset would be that, let's say you find additional knowledge in the DKG that's somehow related to it, then you could add like a link to that additional knowledge, which would increase essentially the algorithmic value of that knowledge, much like Google does it for search engines. Like if your website is pointed to by some really, really powerful websites, like famous websites like X or, I don't know, CNN or whatever, ESPN, like if those websites link to your site, that increases the signal to your site. And therefore this signal, meaning more value on the side of that knowledge asset, it shows up higher in search. Depending on the context, it can mean different things. So that's one, let's say, use case of why you would update the knowledge asset. And a knowledge asset can be anything. It can represent any type of content. It can represent a person. It can represent a real world asset. It can represent a document. It's essentially a piece of knowledge structured as a graph, ideally in some form of structure that is machine understandable, like with some graph ontology. That's how it's called. And you can test them. You can just jump on the chat DKG interface on OriginTrail World. If you go to OriginTrail World, ask a question. In the answers section, you'll see what are source knowledge assets. You can open them and you can explore essentially this graph. You will see this NFT on chain. You'll see its history. So you don't need to hear it from me. You can just go and see it.
Yeah, you could also use the same interface to literally also help you build out the knowledge asset. Like you can say, give me an example of knowledge asset JSON. How does it look like when you publish it? And then you'll get the syntax. And it's a very useful tool, the OriginTrail World. And it keeps getting new knowledge assets, which means that if a knowledge asset about something today didn't exist, you couldn't get an answer. And if tomorrow does exist, it doesn't take a huge amount of training in LLM or something like that, but rather because of this retrieval augmented generation, it'll instantly be able to provide the response to the prompt. So I'm pretty certain that if you go and you try to ask a question around kind of how a JSON for a knowledge asset looks like, which would be relevant, then you'll get an answer as well from the OriginTrail World.
Very exciting stuff. So anybody who has any interest in art at all, go now, go mine those knowledge assets, get in early, get in before it blows up, and we have 100 billion assets on the knowledge graph, which I'm sure we'll get into later. What that's going to look like and how that's going to be achievable. Well, and when I say I'm sure we will, I mean I know we will because I planned the episode out. So let's move on to staking. Possibly the most anticipated development in the OriginTrail ecosystem, I would say, from what I've seen, is staking. Everybody's always asking about it. Now it's finally on the roadmap for Q1 of 2021. So when I think of staking, when I think of it from a traditional crypto sense, you think if you lock up your tokens in a smart contract, you get rewards of some kind in return. Maybe they're USDC, maybe they're the native token, sometimes the staking In the case of like Ethereum, it helps secure the network. In other cases, you stake your lock up your tokens and you're just given money from a treasury that comes from who knows where, and it further dilutes the market cap of the token. So staking in the TRAC and the OriginTrail ecosystem is a little bit different. It's delegated staking. You're delegating your tokens to nodes. So can you explain how staking will work in the OriginTrail ecosystem? And then you're staking TRAC, right? You're not staking Neuro tokens. And then, what's the timeline, if you have one, of when you're going to be rolling this out for the public?
Just a few lines about the importance of this. Obviously, having more TRAC engaged also for security purposes on the decentralized knowledge graph, as decentralized knowledge graph grows, is of paramount importance. And historically, the amount of TRAC that got essentially locked in one way or another, so far not for staking purposes, but mostly for node runners having to provide certain collateral, which right now is set at 50,000 tokens. And on the other hand, also knowledge asset publishers would need to expand TRAC, spend it as rewards for node runners to keep providing services to the network. The amount of TRAC that got, let's say, engaged for that purpose grew with the network. And now with the growth of the network that is going to, continually be a constant, the 100x and even more, we need to provide even greater resilience to the network, which means that we also need to engage more TRAC. And there are polarizing opinions within the OriginTrail community. On one hand, we have node runners, which in a way would want to, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but definitely, from this point of view of being a node runner, you would want to retain as many rewards for yourself as the network grows. But that, of course, kind of precludes the possibility of increasing the resilience of the network by having more TRAC, essentially providing this collateral, growing collateral on every node, so that the network becomes more stable, more resilient, that more seriousness is instilled in the network. And OriginTrail is a multi-chain project. Right now, with the V6, actually going towards the V8, we also plan for more chains to be supporting OriginTrail. And the first in line is Gnosis Network, which already supported the previous network V5. So we had plenty of experience with their technology. It's an EVM tech, and also we know their team. It's an environment where builders feel comfortable. And staking will initially take place on the Gnosis chain for several reasons. Perhaps most important one of them is that we will, for the time being, leave the growth of OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph on NeuroWeb blockchain, which is now a renamed OriginTrail Parachain blockchain. So we will leave that growth intact until we incubate the beta staking program on the Gnosis network. And secondly, also it is easier in a way to essentially attract, no pun intended, TRAC utility token onto the Gnosis network from delegators to stake it with a node setup. I think you touched upon the fact that TRAC is a non-inflationary token. So, no future emissions are planned and no changes to the smart contract. So it's a fixed supply of 500 million TRAC tokens. However, in order to initiate the staking, we are going to, from our own reserves, commit 1 million of TRAC tokens, but not, just to spray those tokens towards the stakers, but essentially use that token, the amount of tokens, to grow the network on the Gnosis. So essentially would be kicking off the growth of knowledge assets on the Gnosis network and provide all the necessary tools for staking to take off. And at the same time, there's going to be, an intact growth essentially taking place on the parachain, on the OriginTrail parachain. So this two-tier development approach is going to give us much greater, I would say, clarity when it comes to assessing the staking program and seeing how the nodes in the network on the Gnosis behave, so that we can, further, tweak the staking mechanism. And once we are satisfied with the way things are going on the Gnosis network, meaning that both node runners, so those with the technical capacity to set up nodes, and on the other hand, those who are simply committing TRAC, delegating TRAC, those without, say, major technical knowledge to set up nodes for themselves, but they have TRAC and they want to put that TRAC to use. So once we see that both, let's say, types of users within the OriginTrail ecosystem are happy with the way staking is going, this staking will then gain life on all chains that will have been supported by the time we see that certain parameters are met.
Perhaps just to add on I think what Žiga didn't get to touch upon is, and I think it's an important question that you pointed to is, so where does the reward come from, right? So it's not I lock some tokens in and they fall magically out of the sky or they get printed or whatnot. So essentially what happens is you're supporting the utility of the network with your tokens. And to do that, you delegate those tokens to a certain node. So you basically, as somebody who wants to stake TRAC into the network, you would take your tokens, you would basically pick a node and you would delegate your tokens there. Of course, that is a very completely trustless system. So the node runner cannot take your tokens and run away because it's locked in a smart contract. But this stake is basically helping with the specific node and giving it a boost in the network. So with this boost, the node is going to get a certain bigger amount of rewards. Now, where do the rewards come from? From the knowledge publishers. Whoever creates knowledge assets has to use TRAC. So again, it's not an inflation or something. It's basically, if I were to create a knowledge asset now, I would have to pay TRAC. And these tokens get locked into the smart contracts, eventually end up on the nodes, which actually provably show that they host this knowledge. The nodes with a bigger amount of stake essentially get a higher chance in receiving these rewards. So having that said, the rewards come from utility, and therefore it's not a magic money system or whatnot. Rather, it's directly related to what the DKG brings in this case. And so as a staker, you'll be able to come and initially, as Žiga said on Gnosis, add your tokens, lock them into the network, and essentially share the portion of the rewards from the nodes. There's details, of course. For example, the nodes, each node is able to set a certain operator fee so that there's some fee for this particular feature that they're providing, and also delegating their own tokens to their own nodes. And you will be able to see that pretty much soon on Gnosis. That, I guess, we needed to touch upon that so people don't understand staking as some sort of magic money implementation here.
So as I understand this, correct me if I'm wrong, let's say I'm a node runner. Let's say I want to start a node. I have 20,000 TRAC tokens. I have 2 make it bags, as they would say in the community chat. So you need 50,000 to run a node. So I have 20,000. I don't know how the system's going to be set up, but people could delegate collectively 30,000 additional TRAC tokens to my node, and then we would all collectively now have the capital to be able to run a node and receive rewards. Is that correct?
Exactly. So you can also take those amount of tokens and you don't have to run a node. You can just go and find a node, or somebody who's running a node, and you can delegate those tokens to them as well. Both options are doable.
And it's not enforced though, right?
It's not enforced, but game theoretically, you are, as a node runner, you would want to have as much tokens committed to your node, because then the success rate for you winning the publishings on your node increases. And if that was not so far indicatively implemented on the parachain network, it will definitely be strikingly obvious that larger stake pool on your node also contributes to a much, much larger success rate. So in a way, we are going to be establishing a competition between nodes to win as many TRAC on their nodes. So right now, the main metric, desired metric in the node runners world is to win as many knowledge assets publishings as possible. And that's going to be the case in the future for sure. With one important add-on, that your success rate is going to visibly be dependent on the amount of the TRAC that gets staked on your node.
So OT Hub wants to know if there's a minimum stake that a node operator must have, I guess, before they're able to receive delegated tokens, stake tokens.
I think that's a very sensible question and a sensible thing to have involved. So there's certain amounts, but to Žiga's point, it's much more about kind of giving the, let's say, opportunity to make decisions on how you want to operate your node. The management fee obviously is one aspect of it, or how much you want to open up, how much stake you're willing to accept. But of course, it's going to be very positively showing to the success of the node if they'll be able to attract a greater stake. It's in a way kind of marketplace-ish dynamics between someone who is delegating and then seeing, which nodes are operating under what different properties or configurations. And then on the basis of that, they're selecting who they want to go with and who has like a track record of what, or what they're kind of bringing to the table. And then the delegation can happen following that. But of course, these things are set up in a way that whoever is operating the node is able to configure it. And then whoever is delegating is able to choose who they're willing to delegate towards. But the rule of the game are the same for everyone.
So we had a question that was submitted in the pre-questions for the AMA. Somebody wants to know what incentive stakers have to delegate their track to the nodes now if the network hasn't yet reached its full potential, and presumably it's not yet at the point where it'll see the maximum amount of track rewards that it will see in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever. So is that where that dedicated 1 million track from your personal stash comes in? Is that, by personal stash, I don't mean your individual wallets, just to be clear. But is that where that 1 million track comes in now to increase the incentivization before the network has reached the 100 billion knowledge assets?
No, the initial 1 million is intended just to stir the pot and to see, how participants behave in a new environment, which is initially shielded from the old environment or the current environment on the OriginTrail parachain network, newly the neural web. The network growth has been present since essentially the advent of the network. First off, it was 10x since we went from Ethereum to other L2s because of certain quite apparent efficiency gains between L2s and Ethereum network. And then secondly, once we launched OriginTrail parachain, now neural web, that scalability went even higher, so 100x from the initial 10x. Now, with new updates planned within the V8 foundation, this scalability throughput is going to jump up significantly. And in order to support this scalability throughput with safety in the network, this is where staking comes into play. And it's a free market essentially. So no one is mandating anyone to set up a node. Everybody should somehow, look around. There are even tools that help node runners understand how many nodes there are in the system, how many nodes would it make sense to add into the system. And that, of course, also generates certain costs on the node runner's end. So node runners autonomously decide how many nodes they want to have in the system. Although we have been running nodes by ourselves, especially in the last year since the launch of the V6, and the nodes are profitable. So it depends on to whom you speak. So node runners, and I think it's a very rational thing to do, they would not promote when nodes are profitable, because in that case, they might see or witness new entrants into the system, which is like a very rational behavior. So having the new entrants being able to enter the network without having to set up node, without, let's say, stirring the pot with the existing node runners, the idea to go on with staking makes more sense because, one, you still, by committing your track, by putting it to work, you contribute to the network's resilience as the network grows without necessarily directly stirring the pot, quote unquote, proverbially, with the node runners. Essentially, you can still put more track to work without increasing, any technical burden on node runners or even increase costs by setting up unnecessarily a large amount of nodes. And you can be part of the system by participating with a stake. And of course, on the node runners end, it's going to be, a new dimension to consider. So right now, it's been rational on parachain to cast one's web as wide as possible, pretty much having as many nodes, or at least, sensible amount of nodes to win as many knowledge assets publishing, and hence receive as many rewards as possible. And now this competition will be slightly changed because it might not be as sensible to think about having as many nodes, but rather making sure that you also invite other stakers into your pool, and in that way increase your chances of winning more publishings of more knowledge assets. So not casting your web as wide as possible, or at least not as wide as now, but thinking more in terms of how can I become, as a node runner, more attractive for track holders.
Well, let's get into the scaling question that you kind of referred to in your answer there. And again, we had a lot of questions from the community about scaling specifically. So this brings us into the terminus phase, which is set for Q2 of 2024. And in the roadmap, you make the very bold and ambitious statement that you will be scaling the DKG by a factor of 100, which obviously is an incredibly impressive feat. So given that you've spoken publicly that you've been pushing Polkadot to the max as it is with the amount of usage that the DKG is getting, how exactly do you intend to scale the DKG by a factor of 100?
Yeah, I mean, further breaking blockchains is one of the approaches, but secondly, also doing things on the DKG end are now in plans for the terminus phase. So pretty much two approaches. And perhaps Branimir can dig more into the DKG side of things.
Like Žiga said, there's a multi-channel way to increase scalability, and there's the on-chain scalability. So both expanding to other chains, but also working on specifically where we have influence, such as the optimality of smart contracts that influences how the DKG performs on all chains. So gas efficiency, if you will. And then the second one is specifically for NeuroWeb implementing the relevant updates. So on that front, there's quite a few things coming up. Also from the Polkadot side, we expect asynchronous backing relatively soon, which will increase capacity there as well. So there's quite a bit of stuff happening on the chain side of things and on the DKG side of things. And a system that we've been working on since basically we launched V6. We've been doing research and development on a new type of commit proof system. Node runners will probably know what I'm talking about. Essentially, this system growing in a fashion where we introduced a new component into the DKG, which is called random sampling of proofs. So having the ability to essentially synchronize certain elements in the DKG and increase additional scalability. It's an evolution that takes us to V8, and we expect, again, we cannot measure yet precisely, but we expect at least 100x. In that sense, we're going to see a leaner node as well, having the ability to do more operations, making room for all of the exciting new stuff that comes in V8. So, and I'm pretty confident we're getting there because of the track record. We've seen quite a lot of scalability boosts like this before, like V6 was. So V8 will take its steps and do pretty much a similar type of a jump. Yeah, it's also interesting to learn what you need to do from a technical perspective. And we've been building this obviously for many years now. You need to put it to test. You need to drop it on a different chain. You need to, have a wider volume and more usage of the technology. And I'm super excited that we're there because it's actually really good to see how you start to touch certain limits. Because when you do, you then realize where the limits are and how you can improve. So 100x is, I'm pretty confident something we'll get with the V8 by the time it's out.
You mentioned, Branimir, something about the idea that we may see leaner nodes. So it transitions perfectly into a question that we got, which was asking if this enormous expected increase in activity will result in new requirements for nodes. And all that in there, will the amount of track it requires to run a node change? Or does that not matter anymore because of the staking?
Yeah, so very briefly, the component of security and stake in the network, we do not expect to change. It's the underlying mechanics that I meant with the leaner node, meaning that the node will have to do essentially implement a new type of system, this random sampling system that will have, in a way, less work on some end, which will make room for more capability in the sense that we discussed about already. So knowledge mining, knowledge reasoning, autonomous knowledge mining. Now, it's really hard to say, will the operations of the node require less or more, let's say, power than they do now? But we're conscious of the capabilities that the nodes have. We also have a very sophisticated telemetry system that we track pretty much all the time. It's absolutely necessary in such distributed systems. So having all that said, we're going to aim, obviously, not for some sort of a humongous increase in hardware requirements or whatnot. but we're going to have to see. This is also the journey. That's where Terminus is going to take us, and we're going to iterate and understand where we can tweak and what can be done. Because again, sometimes it's really hard to predict these things. You can do certain things theoretically, like do algorithmic complexity analysis, things like that. But at a certain point, you have to test them in reality. So we'll have to see. That's like the shortest answer, but we do not expect an incredible change. And we also do expect that this new power not just brings more features, but that we can build them more efficiently, such as the proof system, because we learned how over the course of the functioning of the various networks, testnets that have been deployed.
So with this 100x throughput that is coming, is the DKG still on track? And I think this was a pun intended by the person who asked this question, to reach 1 billion knowledge assets by 2025. And will it be able to handle if there is some explosive growth that occurs in the short time frame?
That's a really good question. We're going to have to be quick. We have to build the scalability features that I was discussing about like as soon as we can. And that's why we're starting to work on them as soon as possible, as soon as we are in the Terminus impact base. And having that said, I think at the same time, we expect a lot of activity. So that's why this has been prioritized essentially when you think about it. So having V8 come out as soon as possible is definitely needed. Having that said, I'm very positive in terms of optimistic that we will be able to handle all of the required load through all of these avenues that we're able to increase scale. So it's going to be a journey where we reach 1 billion knowledge assets in due time, for sure. And I cannot predict when exactly, but given just the interest that's growing, what we're hearing from people, the amount of builders that's growing on the DKG, that we're going to have to tackle all of the tech stuff so we can support the billion very soon.
I'm very excited to see what a DKG with 1 to 100 billion knowledge assets looks like in practice, who's using it for it to be at that scale. You know, you hinted earlier that there are some exciting partnerships possibly coming that I'm sure will help push that number up. And a lot of the people or organizations that have been using the DKG so far have been publishing private assets. So we had a question that asked when we can expect to start to see some more public assets on the DKG.
Yeah, that definitely comes with the knowledge mining and with the advent of being able actually to query the network and in a user-friendly manner, such as using the chat DKG. The private knowledge assets, nonetheless, are still going to be a normal part of the DKG's living. Supply chains are partners in sectors where sensitive information still needs to be shielded, but still has to be made discoverable for relevant parties and also be made immutable, so with integrity. These kind of use cases are not just going to stay there, but they're going to grow according to what we're receiving from partnerships. So it's going to be a coexistence of both for sure. You cannot build a sturdy system that many want to use, especially enterprises, if you don't also allow for private information to be exchanged. But what we're really happy to see is that there are more use cases popping up whereby public knowledge is going to be the primary, interest for those who are publishing and those who are reading from the network.
So part of what will help to bring about this growth to the 1 billion knowledge assets is going to be the multi-chain aspect and increasing multi-chain future of OriginTrail, which is specifically mentioned an element of the Terminus impact. What caught my eye is the mention of Bitcoin on there, and that also sparked a few questions as well. So are we talking inscriptions? Are we talking ordinals? Is that what these are going to be? What does a knowledge asset look like on the Bitcoin network?
So in order to incite miners, you don't want to limit them. So ideally you want to excite them to get engaged with as many use cases as possible, including Bitcoin ordinals. In the past, we as the builders have also been the agents for the growth of the network and achieving new partnerships, even getting financial support to bring about all the network activity. And now with some initiatives such as Chat DKG initiative, we even supported builders to essentially build tools that can be used either by builders or by those builders that want to use DKG for a specific use. So in that manner, we see ourselves to be becoming more of an enabler, not just a driver for new use cases. And as an enabler, or even as one of the enablers, we see that even the use case that you mentioned, so tracking ordinals, making sure that also knowledge asset as a technology can be used to describe all of the exciting things that are going on within the Bitcoin ecosystem, can also come to existence on the DKG.
Partly we could perceive this also through kind of having different blockchains within the consensus layer kind of see value in for different use cases. So like there's now some discussions around Bitcoin also kind of having certain layer 2 with some capabilities which could see some level of integration also with the DKG. So it's like it's an interesting kind of field to look at. And yeah, like Žiga mentioned, from our perspective, it's really about enabling that when, a powerful use case where having or publishing something to the DKG and unleashing the whole chat DKG capabilities really brings value, that's possible and that can be done quickly and efficiently. And it's then these ideas start to spur and they can really go. But it seems that more and more things will also be possible in the future. And of course, Bitcoin as an ecosystem is a very vibrant community lately.
Are there any integrations you have planned with other blockchains? You mentioned Bitcoin right now, obviously. We've got staking coming to the Gnosis chain. Are there any other integrations you have planned that you're able to share at this time?
There is much more interest around bringing DKG to other networks. There is, however, a process all these blockchain ecosystems need to take into account, and it is described in one of the RFCs. After, the process reaches a certain maturity stage, this is also when we decide on when exactly is the right time to put this new blockchain integration into the pipeline. So we try to take into consideration both the demand and, what is sensible for the decentralized knowledge graph and OriginTrail ecosystem. And I think right now we're at the optimum. So the updates coming with the Gnosis make total sense with staking for OriginTrail community. So we intend to move with this optimal pace. So taking both into consideration what is needed for the OriginTrail ecosystem and what others have to offer, meaning other blockchain ecosystems.
So we are starting to run a little low on our time we've carved out here. So I want to ask one more question about the multi-chain future before I move on to the AI mining, which was another very hot topic in terms of the questions that we got asked. But this was a really interesting question that we got that I want to put to you guys and see your thoughts on. So in a multi-chain future, have you thought about funneling certain types of knowledge assets to certain specific chains that are best suited for their use cases? So maybe you use Bitcoin for things that need a certain level of permanence, and you use other chains for other things that are more suitable, again, for whatever that specific knowledge asset is.
Yeah, I think this question makes a lot of sense, not only as a question, but we could all even transform it into a statement. And to support that, even the plans that we described just a few moments ago about staking and about maintaining the level of mostly enterprise adoption on the parachain, say, makes a lot of sense. So using certain chains, especially when the integration just happened for certain experimental things, and even, based on the nature of the knowledge assets. So let's say that some of the knowledge assets or the bulk of the knowledge assets on a new chain, it might make sense to put, let's say, public knowledge on certain chains, because that public knowledge might be even better exposed via certain chains than the other, which is, let's say, a little bit more enterprise purpose oriented, like neural web. So this kind of description or a question kind of like really, really makes sense. It could be transformed into a statement even. And actually, yeah, that's happening. We now see that the OriginTrail parachain, newly the neural web, is going to keep on supporting the growing influx of the knowledge assets, supporting pretty much enterprise use cases, whilst, sharing certain cases or uses also with other chains, which even might assume most of the, certain more special knowledge assets. Let's say we touched upon the knowledge assets that are not private knowledge assets, like the public knowledge, scientific research. It might make more sense to expose those knowledge assets to, Gnosis chain. Or in the case of art, it might make sense to expose art to even some other chains, because those chains perhaps have some other value propositions that are not yet built into the parachain on Polkadot, but might be, sufficiently built out, let's say, marketplace features. So, long story short, yes.
So we have one impact base left, which is the Gaia impact base, which is established in H2 in the second half of 2024. And this is where we see AI-powered autonomous knowledge mining, which sounds like something out of an Isaac Asimov book, just the description right there. So what exactly is this? How's it going to work? Are we talking like bots that scrape the internet and just upload literally everything that's on the internet onto the knowledge graph? Is it targeted? What exactly is going to be going on here?
Such a broad topic that I can go off in all kinds of directions. I'll try to somehow humanize it a bit, but essentially it's the autonomous knowledge, AI-powered autonomous knowledge mining is the concept of taking what we do with knowledge mining beta program, where knowledge miners do essentially knowledge mining by themselves in some form of either creating software that does it for them or doing it manually, even that we go to the stage where the DKG itself can do that. So what does that mean is that the DKG, because it receives knowledge from all of the knowledge that's published and essentially amassed in the network, is able to infer or rather reason new knowledge. And that means it can effectively understand, it can find new facts that weren't there before. And I can maybe explain in a very simple way. So there's many ways to do this. The basis essentially of it comes from this capability, this unique capability of the DKG to synergize symbolic and neural AI. Actually, I even seen a very interesting, I retweeted yesterday's announcement by Google DeepMind, they're exactly doing this. They're basically combining the neural and the symbolic approach to solve all kinds of complex problems. And these two AI approaches actually complete each other in a way. You can kind of think of them, if we simplify it to human level, we can think of it as kind of like your creative brain. What was that? The left side, and then the rational brain, which is, I guess, the right, or maybe I flipped those. But in any case, the LLM is kind of more like creative, hallucinating, like thinking wild thoughts, sometimes going crazy. And the symbolic, the knowledge graph layer is more like this, rigid mathematical type of reasoning engine where you can input some rules, and these rules, for example, logical rules, can be used to produce new knowledge. And I can explain in a very simple example, how does that look like? For example, if you can take a very simple rule that we have as humans is that, for example, a son of a son is basically a grandson, right? And then a father of a father is a grandfather, right? That's kind of a rule that we invented. As this very simple example, you can think of having these two pieces of information. I don't know, A is son of B and B is son of C. You can have these two pieces of information disconnected. They can be in two different places at the same time. Until you connect them, you're not able to connect the fact that A is grandfather of C, right? Super simple. That doesn't happen naturally when you just put it in kind of a database. You can have these two entries. Think of it as kind of like Excel sheet, right? You can have A, father of B, and B, father of C. These two statements don't necessarily mean that you understand, that the computer understands that A is grandfather of C. And that's where knowledge graphs come in with this specific feature called ontologies and the ontological reasoning, meaning that if you tell the knowledge graph, hey, there's a rule that says that the father of a father is a grandfather, then the knowledge graph can understand this and it can infer this new fact. It's effectively a new fact that wasn't there before. So the point here being is that through strategies like this, such as knowledge graph reasoning, LLM reasoning, and all kinds of different strategies in between, the existing knowledge can generate new knowledge, essentially creating autonomous knowledge mining. And this autonomous knowledge mining also being a very broad topic. So you as a miner would be able to decide what kind of mining you want to do. So do you want to just focus on reasoning in the knowledge graph sense and that everything just goes by the rules because that is important for you and your knowledge base? Or is it more interesting for you to go into the more creative direction? Are you trying to do more with, let's say, with art? So you're going to use more such type of autonomous knowledge mining and reasoning versus going a little bit more sturdy, let's say, in a world of scientific knowledge or in the world of mathematical knowledge or, similar things. So again, I can go very, very wide, but in the sense that looking at autonomous knowledge mining, to bring it all back to play, AI-powered knowledge mining, basically neural plus symbolic AI-powered knowledge mining will enable this system to become autonomous. So that would mean if you're running a node or if you're running a knowledge miner, the software, the AI-based software of this knowledge miner will be able to understand new things. And then because they find something new in the graph, they can create a new knowledge asset, mine new knowledge, connect it with the knowledge that actually this was derived from, effectively giving signal to that previous knowledge, effectively mining even more. Once we hit this critical amount of knowledge assets where these connections can be found, no human can do this when you think about it. Like there's such a vast amount of knowledge that some of the discoveries in science in general just come from the fact that somebody connected a couple of facts together. They managed to stumble upon these two things together. Or, for example, innovation like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a combination of a couple of different technologies and obviously a creative mind that understood how they can combine hashing, consensus, Nakamoto-based consensus, public key cryptography. These were all there before, except not Nakamoto consensus, but essentially consensus systems. So what I'm trying to say is that, by combination of things, we can get incredible results, such as Bitcoin or like new drugs for diseases that we didn't have before. So imagine having the largest knowledge base in the world, which the DKG will become, which has provenance of all of the entries, which has verifiability, which has the properties of ownership. So it's a collectively crowdsourced knowledge base. Then once it's big enough, you're able to make connections you couldn't make before, that no Web2 company could make on its own because it had maybe a big knowledge base for its thing, like Uber has about driving in cities and whatnot, but it doesn't have about other things. So the largest knowledge base in the world will basically enable such autonomous knowledge mining. And of course, AI is going to do it because we as humans are not going to process this incredible amount of information. I'm super excited about this. And if you read Asimov's book, you'll see Gaia is essentially a superorganism. It's a planet that is interconnected in all its facets. And that is why Gaia represents the final impact base for V8, where we effectively create the first AI-powered autonomous knowledge mining in the world. So it's going to be incredibly exciting. I cannot wait, honestly, and really looking forward to building this. And also, here's a shout out for all of the contributors and a call for all of the developers who are interested in this idea. Do join us. OriginTrail is an open source project. There's many ways you can do it, either by contributing code directly or building out your own project through the ChatDKG program, or just joining the Trace Labs team also. We are hiring. So there's many ways you can be part of this and not just build it together, but also learn all of this great, exciting stuff through the effort of building it. And I think it's a really important effort because fundamentally, if we don't find a way to organize and somehow make sense of information that is growing at an exponential pace on the internet, and it's growing by AI generating it, right? So very soon we're going to hit a moment where there's more AI generated content on the internet or in humanity than content that was generated by humans. Well, how do we make sense of that when that moment hits? I'm excited about what the technology will bring. We absolutely need it. We need a way to make sense of all of this incredible, vast information that's going to come out and misinformation and that as well. So it's a very important mission, and I invite you to join us on this mission.
So it's not that the AI will be creating brand new knowledge by going to Wikipedia and reading articles and creating knowledge assets that link to Wikipedia articles as just a random example. The people will be doing the initial mining, and the AI will then take what people have mined and create knowledge assets based on that, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, so essentially there's no limit for somebody using AI to create their knowledge assets right now. So you can do that if you will. You can, like, with a little bit of coding using the DKG client and perhaps, let's say, ChatGPT, you can create knowledge assets with AI even today. So V6 enables that. But what we see essentially in the future is that you will have all kinds of approaches. Like, for example, you might have classic data pipelines that will be contributing to the DKG, maybe some scrapers, like you mentioned, like all these things together. We expect to see all kinds of modes of usage and knowledge mining, ultimately also with AI.
So one question we got from the community is, are the AI agents going to be spending TRAC tokens to mint these knowledge assets? And if so, who will be funding them?
Super short answer is yes. And will be funding them? Well, whoever owns them. So if you're running an AI agent as your tool for knowledge mining or for just creating knowledge, then it's your tool, right? So you're supposed to fund it.
If you create an AI tool and you fund it with TRAC to mine this knowledge, you could sort of consider it an investment in a sense, in that theoretically, by mining this knowledge, you'll be able to then leverage that knowledge in some way that will return profit to you in the future. Very interesting. Okay. I have some grab bag questions here that we can go through real quick before we log off if you want to give us your quick hit answers. But first, is there anything that any of the three of you wanted to add about the V8 Foundation that we didn't get to discuss during these questions that I asked you?
Yeah, I think we went through it pretty thoroughly. I think the practice will show the rest. As it has been in the, fashionable with OriginTrail, we've always been building stuff whilst validating it with real-world partnerships, and we intend to do so. So it's going to be exciting to see the partnership play in action, and lots of it will become obvious in the following weeks, months, leading towards the totality of this V8 Foundation.
Great. All right, I'm going to run through some of these questions real quick and give me, again, your quick hit answers. When can we expect to see OTP, now Neuro, listed on more decentralized exchanges? And what's the best way for people to obtain Neuro tokens?
Yeah, so we typically don't comment on the exchanges, but it's quite obvious that we built the utility to the token itself, so there is demand for it. And it's only logical to see that more and more venues will be, I guess, offering or making the utility token available because it's needed for the functioning of the network or the networks.
Mm-hmm. We also got some questions about the liquidity of the TRAC token. So one question being, what is the team doing to help increase the liquidity of the token both on exchanges and on DEXs?
The team is not supposed to get involved in these things. So liquidity in the markets is something that other entities are involved in, and we're not directly or indirectly involved in the way liquidity is being added onto the markets. These things, if you go and look into what's publicly available, you see that the liquidity is improving. Also, if you look into, and I'm not a trader myself, but if you look at the most obvious things like depths, all these things seem to be improving. So the entities that are involved, other than the team were involved in building the technology, you can see that things look better. That utility token is available for those who intend to use it, and that's something that we hope will even improve in the future.
Something that the team is directly involved in and can very much comment publicly on is, why is the OriginTrail team so handsome and dynamic?
I think it's we can, but we don't know what exactly is meant by that question. But I guess the thank you is in order at this place.
Guess you can thank your mothers and fathers for that one. Since the price per published asset has been lowered to 0.14 TRAC and is still very affordable to publish assets, will this price be fixed to ensure profitability?
You most likely mean improving or increasing the profitability of nodes. Again, decentralized knowledge graph is a permissionless ecosystem. It's outside of our control. It's built into the permissionless nature of the ecosystem. Say that we would now make a controlled environment and prevent, newcomers, new entrants, new node runners to start participating. That would be one instance where we could say, the price is going to go this and that, but that's something we don't do. The system itself is open. And it's also in line with the three principles of neutrality, inclusiveness, and usability. So there is no limitation of the price per knowledge published in terms of the downside limitation or even upside limitation. So we might even see the price of knowledge asset published in some of other, let's say, chains to even go up much higher than what we see right now as a price that's been stable at the price that you mentioned. So we cannot control that and we won't control that, but we kind of expect both price to go up and price to go down. That's how things work in an open and permissionless system.
And then finally, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that you'll be sponsoring and heading to the GS1 conference this year. So will there be press coverage of the technology and solutions demonstrated there? How can people tune in to watch it? Is that an option? And then anything else that you want to add about the GS1 conference?
Yeah, we'll definitely do our best to cover the conference and the week that's going to bring a lot of fresh stuff that is being built on OriginTrail and what we've achieved with partners. So we're definitely going to cover that. There is no direct stream from the event. It's a closed event. GS1 is considered to be, or at least the summit, the GS1 week is considered to be kind of a supply chain Super Bowl. So who's who from the biggest companies are going to be there. And we're looking forward to showcase some of the advancements within the AI space and how AI technology can be used to increase not just transparency, but also efficiency in supply chains. Also how we, in an innovative way with our partners from the TANA, also use DNA, so encoding knowledge assets into the DNA in order to protect authenticity of products. And likely this GS1 roadshow is also going to, by extension, or it's going to extend into some other activities with other partners. And all of these things are going to be announced in the following weeks. But we hope to see this roadshow to be extended to other European cities, because we've received invitations from like some of the biggest companies in this space. And we hope we can set up something and also invite the community to join us in person in one of those interesting venues.
Very exciting. And I would say this has been a very exciting first episode of the On TRAC podcast. I mean, we covered like an insane amount of details. We went very in depth on everything. I apologize to people whose questions I was not able to get to. Y'all just submitted so many questions and it's just impossible to get to all of them. So if I did not answer your question, please resubmit it for next episode, which we will be doing in the month of February. More details to come. I'm sure it'll be juicy and exciting, just as this one was. So thank you to everybody who's watching on YouTube, watching on Twitter, and who will be listening in the future on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or elsewhere. And trace on, I guess.
Stay on track.
Trace on, everybody.
Thanks again, Jonathan. Stay on track.
This has been On TRAC, brought to you by OriginTrail. If you like what you heard, consider giving this show a follow and leaving a 5-star review. You can keep up to date with OriginTrail on Twitter/X at Origin_Trail. That's ORIGIN_TRAIL. And you can follow me, your host, at MadDopeMadic. That's MadDopeMadic. Until next episode, trace on and stay on track.